Hello and welcome. You're watching Business Plus. After news of Go First going under and filing for insolvency, the aviation sector in India is buzzing. On one hand, flyers are scrambling in absence of regular flights after Go First grounded flights for 3rd, 4th and 5th of May for 3 consecutive days. There is also fear that air ticket prices are likely to shoot up. On the other hand, there is the future of Go First and its 5,000 employees that hangs in balance. Remember, Go First has filed for insolvency before the National Company Law Tribunal, NCLT. Now, Go First, remember, has been reeling under pressure for a while. The airline has blamed Pratt & Whitney for the non-supply of engines, for its misfortune and for the reason of grounding 50% of its fleet. On the agenda today, future of Go First, turbulence in the aviation sector and what's in store for flyers. Joining me at this point in time, Jitender Bhargava, former Executive Director, Air India, Dhiraj Mathur, former partner at PwC. In the studio with me, Soumalya Santikari, my colleague, and Gulam Jalani also joining us in the studio today. Gentlemen, appreciate you taking time. But before we move on, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to News9. Let me begin by asking you, Jalani, you had booked a ticket with Go First, not for 3rd, 4th or 5th, but for 6th of May, and there is no clarity on where it stands. How are you feeling right now?
Yeah, Shweta, this is a very difficult situation for me particularly, because we have a family wedding in my hometown Srinagar later this month, and I had booked this ticket 2 months ago for my family on 6th of this month. So it is very difficult in the sense, at least these people who had booked tickets on 3rd, 4th and 5th, they have the clarity that their tickets are cancelled, there won't be any flights and they will get refunds sooner than later. But for me it's difficult because I don't know what to do, because the airlines,
so no intimation from the
there
airline?
is no intimation. If I ask I had booked this ticket for through an agent. I asked my agent, what do I do? He says, sir, we cannot cancel the ticket, we cannot reschedule the ticket for another airline, and we cannot reschedule the flight for the next day. So the Go Air are clearly refusing to reschedule the tickets. So that's how we don't know what to do. There's no clarity absolutely. And on top of it, it's not just that, I had booked this tickets 2 months ago because there was absolutely, costliest ever tickets to Kashmir that I, that's my hometown. So I have not seen such costly tickets to small town.
So you were saying it was costly even back then,
yeah,
and now it's going to be more difficult.
Saying I travel twice, thrice a year, to Srinagar, but this is a small town, there are not many options for us. And these were the only 2 options. One was Go Air, another was some timing issue was there, it was early in the morning. So I booked this, I asked my agent to book this ticket because I had no other option. And now, 1.5 months down the line, and 3 days before the flight is planned. So I come to know that there is no clarity. So it's not about, I am also traveling myself, but thankfully I am traveling in Air India. But my wife and my son are traveling on 6th. So there's a lot of confusion and there's no clarity.
Absolutely. And a lot of people like Jilani who don't really know what their flight timings are going to be, if at all they'll be able to take the same flight, because even though Go First, formerly Go Air, has said that they are halting their operations for 3rd, 4th and 5th, we don't know if they're going to be back up in air, Soumalya.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, these are harrowing times, and it seems history is repeating again. We saw Jet grounding operations in April 2019, if I'm not wrong. I mean, almost we are completing 5 years nearly. And these are, as I said, passengers, they're always left in the lurch, and we say the customer is the king, but India, that's not the case. And definitely when it comes to airlines, obviously you're taken for granted, because we are also seeing reports that the customer care line is not responding to the queries of consumers. Flyers have to pay through their noses to book on other airlines. And especially when it comes to cities like Srinagar and other small tier cities where there are limited operators flying operations. So already you have 2 operators, and in this case, if one goes out, obviously you can imagine how much the ticket prices will rise in this scenario. So I can totally feel for Jilani and many other passengers who have been left in the lurch following this sudden announcement.
And it's not just Jilani, there are thousands of other such passengers. And what's more surprising to me is that even DGCA was not made cognizant of Go First halting its operations until it did.
Yeah, and these are worrying signs, and it's not the first time this is happening in the Indian aviation sector. We've seen Kingfisher, we've seen Jet, and obviously somewhere down the line the regulators need to take responsibility. And they need to ensure that the flyers, the consumers, they are not at the mercy of these operators who obviously they have problems of their own, but you cannot suddenly put an end to operations overnight and inconveniencing people.
Okay. Let me get in Jitender Bhargava at this point in time. Jitender ji, I want to understand from you, what's the future of Go First looking like? We understand that it will go before the NCLT. What happens thereafter?
You see, let's look at the facts first. What Go First has put in public domain is that because they have half of the fleet grounded because of Pratt & Whitney not providing engines, they are being forced into cancelling flights. Now, if that is the truth, I'm guarding it, then deliberately putting it, if that is the truth, then it's a difficult proposition. Because I have, in my experience in the airline industry, never seen a problem persisting for 3 to 4 years with engine manufacturers. Go First has put it in public domain that in December 2019, they had 7% of the fleet grounded. In December 21, they had 31%. In December 22, they had 50% of the fleet grounded. The question is, if such was the problem, did they escalate it to the highest level in the government of India, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, for people to know? One. The second part is DGCA has all the data because all airlines are duty bound to submit to them the data at the end of the month, how many passengers they carried, etc., and on-time performance. The market share of Go Air has fallen from 9% to 6.9% in the last 6 months. This should have been sufficient for the alarm bells to be rung in the DGCA for close monitoring of the airline operations. Because you can't expect an airline to all of a sudden come at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and say we have filed an insolvency petition with the NCLT because we can't sustain our operations. Now, there are very few examples where an airline which has suspended operations for want of cash, which I'll come to it in a minute, has got back flying. Take the example of Jet Airways. Prolonged period with the NCLT, you found a buyer, but they've still not been able to resume operation for umpteen reasons.
Right.
Likewise here, if the Pratt & Whitney is not the sole factor, and which is of reality also, you see, the airline has been struggling to pay its vendors. The staff has often not been paid on time, etc. So there is a financial problem with the airline as well. But unless you really come and say, I have a problem on hand, where are you going to find a solution? I think the easierly they put it across the blame on Pratt & Whitney, and I've been advocating it since yesterday. It is time for Pratt & Whitney to come out with this statement and put it in public domain that this is a true, and if it is true, why have they allowed the problem to persist so long?
In fact, they have. Jitender ji, in fact, they have, from what we're given to understand, they've given a statement saying that there is a lengthy, and I quote, lengthy history of missing its financial obligations. They are saying that it's not all our fault. Go First has in fact missed on its financial obligations towards Pratt & Whitney.
So, you know, this is what I said. Now, once you have not been paying a vendor is really not obliged to provide you services unless they are sure of the money. So had the Pratt & Whitney come out and put the statement in public domain yesterday, the problem would have been addressed in a different manner. The Government of India, Ministry of Civil Aviation, DGCA have all to come in. As one of your panelists very rightly said, a customer, that look, what am I going to do in these circumstances? If he's going to cancel his flight, the agent will deduct money. If he is to buy a ticket on the other airlines, he's going to pay twice the sum for it. Because our airlines have been flying with 90% seat occupancy in the last few months. And one point that needs to be reiterated is, this has been the best time for Indian aviation. The fares are high, airlines are flying with high occupancy, ATF prices have been on the way down, etc. All good parameters for, for operational efficiencies. But look at what has Go First done. A very wrong thing, and they have systematically been, you know, not paying the oil companies, the airport operators, other vendors, Pratt & Whitney being only one, staff, etc. So the writing was on the wall. But if you don't want to read the writing, well, there is little that anybody can help. I at least do not give Go Air much of a chance for revival or for resuming operations in the near future.
Okay. Okay. Dhiraj, do you agree with that analysis? Not much of a chance there for Go First to revive itself? Because if you look at the financial troubles, and I want to spell out some numbers here before I get you in. Promoters infused as much as 3,200 crores over the past 3 years. We know banks are looking at staring at a loss of 5,600 crores if Go First goes through NCLT and insolvency, after that. We are looking at a major aviation player going under and taking promoters under with it.
Yeah, so I don't entirely agree with what Bhargavji said because look, I think there is an issue with Pratt and Whitney, and there's an issue with this engine, the GTF, the geared turbofan. Now, I think GoAir ordered 72 A320 Neos, and chose Pratt and Whitney's GTF engine. And I recall very clearly at that point of time, everyone was praising, and Airbus was flaunting this as the new green aircraft, fuel efficient, and so on. Now, but I believe there have been problems with this engine from get-go. There were delays in manufacturing because of which deliveries were delayed. And as there have been maintenance issues with this engine from the very beginning. And which is why I think, as GoAir said, that on average in 2020, 30% of their fleet was grounded. In 21, it was 26%, and in 22, 33.9% on average. December 2022, 50% of their aircraft were grounded. So this is clearly a problem with the engine. And GoAir isn't the only one. Indigo has also faced this problem. They also have it, and so have some of the other international airlines have also faced a problem with this.
In fact, I was about to come to that, sir. Sorry to cut you in. Indigo also seemed to have same problems, but they also have Pratt and Whitney engines. And now the A320, A320 Neos that we're talking about, they have the fleet of A320 Neos.
Yes.
However, there does not seem to have the same substantial sort of impact on their operations as compared to Go First.
Yeah, I mean, they have a much larger fleet, for one.
Okay.
And secondly, because they're a much larger customer, Pratt and Whitney did say something about prioritizing their customers. So I think that they've had less of an issue, but the DGCA was very well aware of it, and it did intervene. Intervene in 2019. DGCA asked both Indigo and GoAir to replace all the faulty engines before inducting a new aircraft of the same variety, the same category. On request from these two airlines, the DGCA extended its deadline of 31st Jan to May for the engine replacements and modifications to take place. So, and I believe that earlier this year in March, the DGCA has taken up these issues with Pratt and Whitney after more than 60 aircraft were grounded. So, this is not something that happened overnight. This is something that has been going on over the last 4 or 5 years. GoAir has been facing difficulty with these engines have given trouble not just to GoAir but all the other airlines that have bought them, and this aircraft not being available for flights, being grounded, 30% of your fleet is grounded, 25% of your fleet is grounded. Now, obviously the airline is going to lose money because the fixed cost of those aircraft, the crew, the lease rentals, and the parking space, all of that is a fixed cost. And but there's no revenue because there's no revenue coming to meet those costs because the airlines the aircraft aren't flying. So you can't just say that that GoAir defaulted on paying vendors. I mean, as far as the liabilities are concerned, what I understand is that they haven't defaulted on any of the debt, the financial creditors. The defaults have been largely on the vendors and the aircraft vendors. So, and their problems clearly are because of the the fact that such a large number of their aircraft have been grounded because the engines were giving trouble.
Okay.
So it's not fair to put the entire onus on Go Air. Now, Go Air, I am from, I believe, has made all efforts. They've tried to contact, talk to Pratt and Whitney. When everything failed, they went into arbitration in Singapore. They, normally they went in for an emergency arbitration. They got an award in their favor. Pratt and Whitney was supposed to have supplied 27 engines by end of April, and then 10 every month till the end of the year. Pratt and Whitney has defaulted on its obligations. It has defaulted on its contractual obligations that which it entered into when they sold these engines. They've defaulted on an arbitration award. So now finally Pratt and Whitney is suing them in the United States. So I think there is, there may be issues that Go Air face. Otherwise, Go Air was a good airline. It was doing well. Customer service was good. The complaints record is good. On time record is good. So I don't think that it's a mismanaged airline. I think that they were just plain unlucky to have got an engine that has a technical problem that the manufacturer hasn't been able to fix. And then, of course, COVID and the Ukraine war has would definitely have disrupted Pratt and Whitney's supply chain, because of which they themselves have said that they have had issues with our supply chain, and that has delayed delivery of engines. And they are hopeful that things will improve over the course of this year.
Okay. Bhargava, sir, if I may ask you to come in at this point in time, you heard what Dhiraj had to say. The idea that airline is to be blamed squarely is far-fetched, perhaps even wrong. There are things that did not work in their favor, as pointed out by Dhiraj ji, in a list of arguments that Go First did right. It did intimate every possible authority it could. It did intimate its flyers. It did, take Pratt and Whitney to court, but nothing worked in its favor. So perhaps it was just sheer luck at the end of it. After taking all due measures, they could not live up to the expectations.
This problem, as Mr. Dhiraj Mathur very rightly said, is not a new one. It's been there, and it was at that stage when not only Indian carriers, but even some foreign carriers had been impacted, because they also had similar engines. And that was the time when there was a lot of hue and cry on it, meetings take place by DGC, etc. But it hasn't been in recent months, and that is what I was alluding to, that where the escalation of the problem had been done by Go First to relevant levels and said, look, this is the problem, and we are virtually at the threshold of shutting down operations. Okay. Tell me, did you know of anything in the past 1 month? Did DGCA make a statement to that effect? The answer is no. One can also come to a conclusion, very fair conclusion, I would say, that because many of their aircraft were on ground, and aircraft had no business to be on ground because they cost the airline, the cash crunch could be a consequence of it. The resultant problem of poor on-time performance in recent months, schedule integrity being doubtful in recent months, could all be pushed back to the issue of many aircraft being on ground. But the question remains, will you remain silent when a problem is on hand? I did not hear the kind of noise being made by Go First management with the authorities concerned. International court, if the arbitration award has not been implemented, you mean to say you'll allow it to go by default? You've got banks' money. What the banks told about it? That look, this is the problem that you're going to be facing. I'm sure banks were equally surprised by the statement yesterday when it went to NCLT and said, look, protect our assets. Voluntary insolvency, petition being filed there. Now, what I'm trying to put across is that Go First failed miserably in creating a public perception that, look, they have a problem on hand, not of their own making, but of the making of Pratt and Whitney. And let Indian carriers get together, Ministry of Civil Aviation get together, call the top honchos. Okay. I remember when Air India's Dreamliner had problems, they summoned the Boeing people to India for saying, look, your Dreamliners have been on ground for want of spare parts that you've not been able to get. and the problem got resolved. It's a question of escalating.
Okay.
At least I will not buy this argument that, look, I would allow my airline to shut down operations because of a third party. The responsibility must end with the management.
Right. Dhiraj Mathur wants to come in there. I'll get you back,
Yeah.
Jitender. Dhiraj Mathur wants to come in.
Yeah, I mean, Jitender, you're right that they didn't make a hue and cry, but there are two things. Going to the press and saying we have a problem, wasn't really going to help. And frankly speaking, I don't know how much the government of India can really do in the matter. The DGCA has taken up this issue with Pratt & Whitney in March this year. Now, I don't know how much leverage they have. You can talk of India, soft power, economic power, big market, and all of these things. But, it is at the end of the day a commercial dispute, a contractual dispute between two private entities. And I think they did the right thing. They went in for arbitration. Arbitration normally takes several years. So they went in there was a provision for an emergency arbitration. They went in for that. They got the award. Pratt & Whitney refused to comply with it. So they went back again. The arbitration tribunal reconfirmed it. Pratt & Whitney still ignored it. Now they have filed a suit against Pratt & Whitney in the United States, in a Delaware court, I understand. So actually the resolution here is going to come because of legal issues. Now, what I suspect and I would expect Pratt & Whitney to do is go in for an out-of-court settlement with GoAir. Because all these other consequences now, this has become a big issue. Go First has filed for bankruptcy. It suspended operations, and this has now become a big deal. And India is a very important market. It's one of the fastest growing market. Pratt & Whitney cannot afford to get blacklisted or have the government of India take any kind of regulatory action against it. So I think all of this will happen. And the push will come from the lawsuit that GoAir has filed against Pratt & Whitney. If GoAir had come directly to the government of India, the government would have asked them, hey, have you taken any legal recourse? There is a violation of a contract. So if you haven't taken legal recourse, why are you coming to us?
Okay.
So I think what they've done is the correct thing. You have to go through the legal process. And through that legal process, then you apply pressure that would be augmented by some intervention or support by the government or the DGCA or what have you.
Right. But as far as informing flyers is concerned, Dhiraj Mathur, they refused to inform flyers on time. In fact, DGCA went on record yesterday and said, there is a way to do it, and then the proper procedure wasn't followed.
Right. On that point, I certainly agree and sympathize with the gentleman in the studio who's whose family scheduled to fly to Srinagar. As a customer, which I am myself, definitely the airlines owed it to us to inform us and not spring a surprise like this. I mean,
and inform the regulator, which it is supposed to by law.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the DGCA has issued them a show cause notice. But of course, we must also bear in mind, I think DGCA was well aware of what is happening because the summer schedule that GoAir filed, I believe they had committed to 40% fewer flights this year compared to last year. So, and the grounding of aircraft and all of this was very much in the public domain. All of this, it was very much in the knowledge and information of the DGCA. There are regular reportings, regulatory filings that are required. So it's not that this whole issue was a black box and suddenly yesterday it was open. But yes, as far as the customers are concerned, they certainly should have given people notice, given them time to make alternate arrangements. There, I think definitely the airlines have sported. Okay. And I guess I can also understand the atmosphere in their corporate office. I mean, I would hate to be
absolutely
in that situation. There must be a sort of virtual state of panic.
Unpaid salaries, unpaid dues, people not sure of where the future lies, as many as 5,000 people.
But of course, you must also remember that the promoters are very strong financially. They have deep pockets. So I don't think they are trying to, what we read that they're trying to sell their stake or, exit completely. They are trying to do all of that. But I would expect that a group as financially strong, with as strong, such a rich and long legacy of over a century of doing business in India.
Okay.
I don't think that I would expect them to behave responsibly.
Okay, let me get in
That's
my
all I would
colleagues here at this point in time. Shumalu, 5,000 people who are literally scrambling to find an option. They don't know if their jobs are secure. So it's not just flyers like Jilani ji who's sitting here wondering what to do next, whether they're going to get a flight or not. Also people who are working at Go First, they don't know where the future lies. Most of them, and we're given to understand, have not been even paid their salaries for the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, these are harrowing times for the employees, and I feel for the employees in the civil aviation sector as a whole, because it's been one after another. I mean, apart from Indigo and to an extent SpiceJet, obviously in the initially it was good, but later it faltered and it also fell on hard times, but right now it's in a recovery mode. Jet, Kingfisher, I mean, we are seeing these episodes repeat themselves, and I guess some curses working on this sector in this, but obviously it's a tough sector to be in. I mean, as Mr. Mathur said, the promoters have a rich legacy and they would be trying everything in their capacity to ensure that the airline is up and running again. But obviously history shows that not many airlines have returned to the skies post their grounding. And Jet, as we can see, it is also struggling to again come back to the skies despite a NCLT procedure in place, and the same procedure will happen with Go Air. So,
right.
But
can these people be absorbed in the industry? And I would also bring in Jitendra at this point in time. Jitendra, there is a sense that Air India is hiring big time, with Air India Vistara being a big brand now. Do you think there is a possibility that these 5,000 people could be absorbed in case airline doesn't come back?
You know, there are always certain employees like the pilots, aircraft maintenance engineers, cabin crew for that matter, who can find job because our industry is in growth mode. All airlines, other airlines are adding fleet capacity, so they will require more people, and nothing better than getting a trained person rather than a raw hand. Okay. Nobody will dispute this fact. But it is the general employees who do either at the airport and those kind of functions who find it difficult to find jobs, number one. The second point is that from the employee's perspective, if you have put in 10, 12, 15 years with Go Air and you have reached a certain level in the management hierarchy, you do not want to go down, lose out on money, lose out on the status. So you prefer, you can't really take a call and said, okay, I will take a cut, but join. Employment to me matters. Most people do not take a call at the appropriate time. Continue to hope, like many of the Jet Airways employees are hoping, that Jet Airways will one day revive, I'll get my job back. Now you don't get it after 4 years of an airline ceasing operations. So there will be lessons to be learned from Jet Airways for these Go First employees and say, look, let me.
And we are going to come to those lessons. I want to understand from you what's plaguing aviation sector. What are the lacunas with the aviation sector? Because despite big promises and really big ideas and dreams about where the aviation sector can head, there still seem to be a lot of lacunas. But before I do that, I want to bring in Jilani at this point in time. Jilani, what in your assessment could have been done? As a flyer, what were you hoping Go First should have done in order to, if it can't live up to its promise, it can make good by giving you an alternate? What were you expecting?
Absolutely, Shweta. You know, I don't care what is the deal between the engine maker and the flyer. You know, as a customer, I expect the flyer, the aircraft to give me an option. Okay. You know, there are eventualities, there are weather vagaries. You know, this is again, you know, I come to the point, you know, we were already grappling with, you know, fare hike. We were grappling with issues like limited options. We are grappling with weather vagaries. You know, there is weather also, but even in case of eventualities in weather vagaries, you get an option. You know, when there is this announcement is as good as last minute cancellation of a flight. You know, unless you come up with an option.
I think it's worse than that, because you are left in
a lurch, literally. So you don't have an option. So I think the Go Air as a company, as a flyer, they owe it to the customers, because they are ultimately a service providers. You know, a customer should get an option. Even I wouldn't say maybe if there was no way to adjust the flights on the same day, maybe another day. But now, for now, we know at least that the aircraft has not given an option to the customers to reschedule the flight on another date as well.
Absolutely. So no money back, no money sense back, of whether the flight will, take to skies as it has promised.
And no money back, no rescheduling to another flight, and no rescheduling to another date. So this is the level of complications that the customers are facing. And at least, even if they want to cancel, they could have cancelled it like they cancelled for 3, 4th and 5th of May.
Absolutely.
I don't know why they are keeping a customer in a confusion state.
Okay, a lot of confusion there for customers. But the aviation sector in general, and I want to bring in Shom here, Soumalya, who's been tracking aviation sector. We've seen players going kaput, one after the other. You talked about SpiceJet, Jet, then now Go First. Some of them came back, others never come back. What are the challenges with the aviation sector? Why does it seem like it's all gloom and doom?
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a strange paradox playing out here. I mean, the government putting its thrust on the aviation sector. There are talks of being a major aviation hub, and with Tata-owned Air India giving giant orders, and we are being told of record number of flyers flying in. But when it comes to situations like this, obviously, and we are in a duopoly right now with obviously SpiceJet and Akasa, they are two fringe players. So at the end of the day, if you don't give the consumer choice, if the fares are high, obviously you won't see a section of population which you want to move to the aviation sector and flying. They won't be able to move it because of financial reasons. They'll be forced to take long haul train journeys, and in the case of my colleague Jilani, he'll be forced to take some other alternative mode of transport. So where do you see at the end of the day, the customer is at the center of every expansion plan? If the customer is inconvenienced or if the product or service is out of reach, how do you plan to make it a aviation or a thriving hub for that matter?
Okay, Jitendra, how do you make it a thriving hub? Because from what we are seeing, and the trend is not looking very conducive for the overall aviation sector, despite big dreams, big promises, as we were alluding to earlier in our discussion. There seems to come a point every now and then in the aviation sector where one of the players goes under. There are obviously larger challenges. What do we do to make it more thriving than it is at the moment? What are the big lacunas in your mind?
I do not believe there are lacunas anymore. We were a price-sensitive market. People believed, and airlines also believed, that if the fares are raised to meet the cost of producing a seat, the passengers stay away. But what the recent period has shown is that even if the fares are high and people have to fly, they will fly, and that is what is being shown with the consistent growth that we have witnessed. That there are more people flying today than they were doing in the pre-COVID period. One can always cite reasons. Well, the ATF taxation by the states is too high, nobody denies it. Service tax imposed by the government on tickets, not a desirable feature. Whether we have enough of the aircraft maintenance facility in the country's MROs so that the aircraft do not go abroad for maintenance, etc., to cut down cost, another factor. But let's not overlook the fact that the aviation industry is basically dollar denominated. So the moment the rupee keeps depreciating, it impacts the finances of an airline. But it impacts finances of all airlines. So I would not like to single out and say, look, Go Air got impacted more than the other airlines. They all. And the fares that they're commanding now with 90% load factor, they're more than breaking even. Don't be surprised. In the October-December period, Indigo reported a profit of rupees 15 crore a day. And that in the January-March period, if they announce the profit of something like 20 crores a day, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
It's all a question of how you manage, what is your business model. Don't forget, Jet Airways, Kingfisher were exceedingly good airlines. But that time was, even if you were providing a good product, your fare was only 100, 200, 400 rupees, more than what Indigo was setting it as a benchmark as a low-cost airline, and full-service carriers could not. And this is where the distinction comes in. That the airlines that shut down operations, Kingfisher, Jet Airways, were full-service carrier with a higher cost platform. Go Air is a low-cost airline. And there is no reason why finances should be in a state. Leave aside Pratt & Whitney problem for a moment, that they were still not a very profitable airline to say that I can sustain operations. I would agree with Mr. Dhiraj Mathur that Warriors are a financially strong group, but does it help?
Okay.
At the end of the day, what we're witnessing is they may have gone to an arbitrator, they may have filed a legal suit that we have lost an airline, we have employees who have lost it, and we have passengers who have been inconvenienced. And that is not a desirable feature as far as Indian aviation story is concerned.
Okay. What is a desirable feature, Dhiraj Mathur? What is a desirable feature? Because from what it looks like, there was no reason or not much of a reason as to why a low-cost domestic carrier should have gone under. According to Jitender Bhargava, he says that there's not much money that goes in by the way of operations as compared to a full-service carrier. So, what explains, therefore, the fact that India or Indian aviation space is not able to keep up with the competition? There are just not enough players, and if there are players and when there are players, they're not able to sustain.
Well, look, this is a unique, I've said this many times, this is a unique industry. If you look at the entire supply chain, other than the airlines, everybody makes money. The airport operators, the ground handling companies, the ticketing companies, everybody except for the airlines. Now, the airlines face very, very high capital costs, the cost of a plane, the very high maintenance costs, most of which, as Jitender rightly points out, are dollar denominated. So, and it's impossible for an airline. Of course, you do hedge against foreign currency risk and so on. You do cover yourself to the maximum possible extent. But the fact is that, and then we've had a huge number of structural problems. A lot of these, the government is conscious of all of them. Many of them have been addressed. In fact, GST rates, VAT and excise rates in the states have been coming down. Many states have brought them down to 4%, some even lower. Some still continue to be in a high tax regime. But overall, aviation fuel in India is still far more expensive than it is in the rest of the world. And that aviation, the fuel itself takes up about 40% of the cost of operations. So at the very beginning, the most important input is amongst the highest in terms of price in the world. And that always will impact profitability. Now, coupled with that, you have the issues of MRO, that you have to send your planes abroad for maintenance. That also adds to costs. Now, again, there is a focus on making MROs more attractive. There are multiple issues, taxation issues, custom duties issues. A lot of these have been addressed by the government. There are other supply side issues like infrastructure, the number of airports, the quality of the airports. All of these are being addressed by the government.
Okay.
And so a lot of the supply side augmentation is taking place. We just talk about the demand and supply gap as a gap between number of seats available and number of passengers who want to fly or who potentially can fly. But then when you look at the supply side, you have to look at the entire ecosystem, the entire infrastructure. Is that geared up for the kind of growth that the sector has witnessed? So a lot of these issues are being addressed. But fundamentally, this continues to be a difficult sector to operate simply because its costs are so high. If you just ask for 2 or 3 reasons, I would say ATF fuel and
so is there therefore a case to bring ATF under GST?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the airlines have been, asking the government. Now, Mr. Sindhya has also said that, look, we have no issues. It's the state governments who, because for the state government, excise is, this tax is a very major source of their revenue. So everybody needs to come on board for it. But yes, certainly the airlines have been asking for that aviation fuel be brought under the GST regime.
Okay.
Mr. Mathur, you said the government is conscious of all the problems, but at the moment it seems like, it is cutting a sorry figure, and it got out of the aviation business, but it is pinning big on the sector to drive economic growth. And so how do you give wings to players who want to get into the business, but they're all along, as Mr. Bhargava and you said, and we all agreed in the fact that there's been a lack of communication. You don't point out to the lenders. The lenders know from the public, from the press, that an airline is going under insolvency. So how do you address these core issues?
Look, the first thing you said about the government exiting Air India, as the Prime Minister has said several times, government has no business to be in business, right? And especially a service sector, and that too, an airlines industry where you need quick decisions, you need very nimble decision making, and it's not possible for the government to have nimble decision making. There are procedures, there are processes, there are CAG audits, there are all of those things, there are tendering processes, L1 and all of that. So government exiting Air India was a wise and sensible, much delayed but wise and sensible decision. Now, what the government can do, as I said, is resolve many of the supply side challenges, create capacities, build new aircraft, because you just can't have the growth of the airlines industry in India on the basis of the trunk routes. You need to have a hub and spoke model. You need to bring in, bring in passengers from the smaller, the B and C category towns, and you need to give them have airports. You need to have carriers going there. So we have the um, um, yeah. So you need these smaller airports in the smaller towns. You need to remove various other bottlenecks. Um, you need to improve MRO, create an MRO hub in India. There are things that can be done on the taxation side, on customs duties, which will which will encourage people to set up MRO in India. You reduce the GST on MRO. I think they've reduced it from 18% to 5%, if I'm not wrong. And the and of course, airlines, and this is something Jitender has always said, airlines need to behave rationally when it comes to pricing. Selling tickets at below cost of supply is just plain bad economics. So while the government has to do certain things, and it is doing many of them, the airlines also need to be sensible in terms of pricing. We can't have a situation where you're driving prices down to make them uneconomical just to gain market share. Because what's the point of market share? I mean, in fact, if you're selling at below cost of supply, actually the more you sell, the greater is your loss. So therefore, there is a need for airlines also to behave rationally. So it's something that both the airlines and the government both need to do. And everyone knows these issues. It's not that this is rocket science or this has never been discussed. Everyone has been talking about these for the last several years.
Mr. Bhargav, you had a stellar career in aviation. I just would like to know, what do you do about this negative perception about this sector? I mean, you spent your career in this sector spearheading the national carrier. So what do you do about the negative perception, especially when you are trying to revive it or making it sure that it becomes a preferred mode of transportation for the general public?
The aviation industry has evolved. There was a time when I worked when it was national carrier, Air India, government-owned, and government believed that, look, a national carrier was a must for country, like the evacuation of people. But the question is today, who's evacuating people from Sudan? Indian Air Force. So you will always find an alternate to somebody, some other person, if Air India was not available as a government airline to do it. But the reality is, Air India had a role to play at a time when private airlines did not have enough capital to put in. But now that they have industry business houses who can put in the money, there's no reason for the government to be in. And I've been a strong advocate of disinvestment of India for a long time. Because I knew that in a service industry, service matters. But as a government employee who believes that their jobs are secure, they are averse to change in work practices. They will cite an agreement of 1970 and say, look, the union had signed an agreement with the management, please honor those things. Look at recent situation. Tata's have put forth a certain proposal for pilots' emoluments, restructuring of it. Look at the way the reaction has come from the pilot unions. It is because, the Tatas failed in understanding that there is a transition period, that pilots belong to a certain background, have certain expectations, they will take time to change. Pilot unions haven't understood that Air India is no longer a government company but a private entity, and this is the way the work practices take place, or the agreements are signed, or the emolument compensation packages are involved in a private sector. So there is going to be transition time. But let's put it this way and end it on a happy note, that aviation industry is on a firm path, is growing. The government has done a lot of things in the recent past to remove constraints. Look at our airports now. They rank amongst the best. Talk of the immigration at the airport when a passenger comes in. They are amongst the best in the world. You can't fault them. Now, there are only small kind of problems that we have if we go to look at it, the airport exits, etc., which are all being done by being government is supervising it, but getting it done. Take Udan as a concept, linking, Mr. Mathur quoted this example, smaller cities to be linked, underserved cities to be linked with the major thing. It's all happening. So this, in my opinion, is the glorious period in Indian aviation. And that is why it has hurt me more when I found yesterday that Go First has gone to NCLT for voluntary insolvency.
Go First going to NCLT doesn't look like it's a glorious time for aviation sector.
Oh, it is. Look, let's put this is what I said. Leave the Go First example aside.
And how about Jet not being able to revive?
No. Look, if it can't revive, it is of its own. But the reality is
that leaves flyers with very limited choices, sir. That leaves flyers with very limited choices, and the ticket prices go up.
Okay. Let's look at the positive way. What does it lead to? Consolidation in the aviation industry. And
is that a good thing?
J.R.D. Tata. J.R.D. Tata said it in 1953 when we had the nationalization of the aviation industry. It is good to have fewer number of strong airlines rather than have too many airlines but financially weak airlines.
Okay.
We are probably heading in that direction.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Dhiraj Mathur, that it's a good thing for smaller number of players to be stronger as opposed to having more number of players who are relatively weak? But where does the competition come in?
Well, I mean, look, now, I mean, this is not, there are too many distortions in this market to have what is called in economics a perfectly competitive market. There are too many aberrations, too many distortions. You know, there's a very heavy dose of regulation, rightly so. And then the entry barriers are quite high. Capital costs are very high. So it's not easy just for anybody to set up an airline. And then it's a very complicated business. It's not like setting up a mom and pop grocery store, right? Even that has a lot of challenges. I mean, look at the number of SMEs that go under. So running a business is not easy, period. Anywhere else in the world, anywhere in the world, particularly in India. So you can't have 15 or 20 airlines in any country. I mean, a very large country like the United States, both in terms of size and in terms of the population that flies, it's another matter. But even they don't have 15, 20. So and they have a number of small regional players as well. But that's a matured market. The Indian market is still growing. It's nowhere near the size of the US. So you're never going to have a very large number of players. I think what we have seen historically is that, you know, there have been small airlines, they come. I think Indigo is an exception that it has managed to remain profitable. But in the main, and the other thing, of course, also is that there is a need to think about the fact that is the Indian market, the big market, really a market for a full service carrier? Or is it a low cost? Because everyone says, you know, and there's this famous ad that, you know, average kitna deti hai, you know, and so the, you know, so this is a very cost-conscious market, and maybe it's not a market for a full-service carrier. It's probably a market for low-cost carriers, maybe more than one or two low-cost carriers. But yeah, you can't have perfect competition. You can't have too many carriers.
Okay, point well taken. Before I let you all go, I want to take a last question for Mr. Bhargava. We are very ambitious, obviously, on our aviation sector. Just scratched the surface with about 6 to 7% penetration. Where are we headed from here on? You seem to be very positive, very upbeat. What's the way forward? What can the government do to ensure that the hurdles like Go First don't repeat themselves?
Look, as I said, Go First is a different example. Citing Pratt & Whitney's inability to give them aircraft and therefore shutting down is a totally different thing from the general scenario. As I said, the airlines are doing well financially. The people will, airlines which have sound financial backing, good business model will survive. We don't take the guarantee that look, all airlines must survive. They must have the right business model. The government in its wisdom has changed the face of the Indian airports. They've already got a plan of adding 70 more airports. Newer airports are coming up in cities. They're not shutting down the old airports when a new airport is coming up. So all these are positive signs.
Okay.
Now, I am positive on it, but let's not also overlook the fact that Indian roadways have changed. Many people are affording cars and they love to take 3-4 hours of road journey by car, no problem when the roads are good. Take the launch of Vande Bharat trains, which give you an airline experience. I went to Ahmedabad but did not take a flight, preferred Vande Bharat train.
Okay.
Look at the time factor. Travel from my place to the airport, 2 hours before the departure of an aircraft there, the hassle of a security, empty your pocket, take out your laptop and all those kind of things, recollect, get on, wait for the aircraft, get on to the flight, get down and again go through the same process. Convenience of it. So it is not the penetration element of 6-7%. It's the convenience. People will choose. The fact is we must have good connectivity, whether air connectivity, road connectivity, rail connectivity, water connectivity, what it is.
Okay.
And we are moving in that direction. And this is one reason why I am gung-ho and said, look, the future is bright. We are in a glorious period and we are witness to it.
Okay, you are gung-ho. My colleague Jilani here, not so much, not many options left for him.
It's like Amrit Kal, right? So what I as a customer would say, I had an option I had booked this flight. If I look for alternate option other than airlines, I don't have a train to Kashmir. The only option is by road. I don't want to send my kid by road, 1-year-old kid by road. So at the end of the day, I would say that the airline has not, given
much
service that choice. There's not much of a choice, and there is even the airline that I chose has not given me the service. At the end of the day, it is the customer who suffers. I may talk about fancy things. I may talk about Ahmedabad to Delhi, Vande Bharat trains. But what is for me as a customer? I don't see an option.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Mixed reactions coming in there from our panelists and our in-house experts. Thanks very much, Jitender, Dhiraj, Soumalya, Gulam, for joining us on this very important story. Remember, Go First, we don't know what the future looks like, but we know for sure that it's not going to be back on air anytime soon. 3rd, 4th, 5th is the dates on which it's not going to come back. It has halted its operations. It has sent an application to NCLT, which will take about 14 days to revert on its application. There is a sense of jitter among promoters, investors and banks who have who've lended money. We don't know that they're going to get their money back or not. Banks, of course, are in conversations with the top management of Go First. Flyers are looking at a bleak future for the next 3 days. The air prices could go up. That is what experts, in fact, have said. Air prices there could go up. Flyers will have to pay a lot more in the coming few days to take to skies. And that leaves us with all that we could on this discussion on Go First and the future of aviation sector. We will keep tracking all the details. Thanks very much for joining in.